How are you, my friend?
Hey, Robert, my friend, it's so good to be here.
So good to have you, and you're looking pretty dapper in that shirt. I love that shirt. There must be something special going on today. What's going on today?
There is. It's for our special guest. So I specifically wore this just for him,
Uh,
and he doesn't know me, so now he's gonna be thoroughly
he's
impressed.
going to be impressed. Our
Uh,
special guest
I
today is a
thought
best.
today was a good day for a white shirt,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Well, it's
that's
making
the
your
way I
face a
roll
little
it.
dark, but that's okay. Otherwise, it works for you.
Yes,
Awesome.
that's it. I needed a tan, so it works out perfect.
Absolutely. Well, we have a special treat for you guys today. We thought we'd do something a little bit different, bring on someone who really can bring the heat in a different direction than what you're used to from us. So let me introduce our special guest. Our special guest today is Jairek Robbins, Tony Robbins' son. He's a best-selling author, decorated performance coach, and speaker. Jairek Robbins is a man dedicated to helping professionals like you achieve success by living with purpose in your life and business. At only 23 years old, Jairek was awarded the Congressional Award, a gold medal, from the United States Congress. He conducted training for a variety of companies and organizations, including Harvard University, the United States Marines, the United States Air Force Special Forces, UBS, BMW, Keller Williams Realty, Major League Baseball teams, and members of the U.S. Olympic team. He's a trusted advisor and board member to a variety of different companies, in addition to his most recent project as the former president and chief strategy officer of Success Enterprises. Oh boy, Success Magazine, Success.com, Success Coaching, Success Spaces. I grew up reading Success Magazine. I don't know, that has a special place in my heart. Today, the 39-year-old with almost 2 decades of performance coaching experience continues to unlock the secrets for maximizing performance and organizational success, and he's just getting started. Without further ado, let's bring on our special guest, Mr. Jairek Robbins. How are you, my friend?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Love to see your smiling face. You got a great smile, and you're always full of energy and bubbling and bubbling, bubbling.
Hey,
Tell us.
I'm just jealous I didn't wear a cool shirt like that.
Well, Lewis is hard to keep up with. He's a man that's on fire constantly. He's always going.
Trendsetter.
Yeah, he really is a trendsetter, no question. Let's get started, Jarek. You and I, Lewis, all of us, we're kind of, a finger on the pulse of society, right? We know these times are going through somewhat chaotic, and I explain it to people. I say, we all have been voting for change. We want change. We want things to be different. We want things to be different, and all change includes this phase of chaos, doesn't it? So what are you feeling? What are you seeing out there when you're talking to your clients, you're talking to business owners? What's the pulse you're getting, the feedback on?
Well, I'll start just to level set. I don't know how much of you guys talk about Ray Dalio's work and the research they did just on market cycles. I go back and forth on with my brother on this of like, oh, does it really fit? Does it always fit? Is it true and accurate, or is it just something they kind of created that they're betting on? The interesting part though is, at least I think it was in the book Principles, he goes back about 500 years, and he just shows the rise and fall of global empires, and he shows the rise and fall of China, the rise and fall of the Dutch Empire, the rise and fall of the British Empire, the rise and fall or the rise of American Empire. Where it hit its peak power was just after World War II, based on the lending they did for arms and bullets and all the stuff they sold and lent to people around the world. And so you see a peak power of the 8 forms of power he talks about. And then since 1973, you've seen a steady and consistent decline of quote-unquote power in the 8 power pieces as it's just come down. And then you see a hockey stick curve in China in the 8 forms of power that's going straight up. And so when I first saw that, it was interesting to me of like, ooh, not the funnest thing I want to see from at least an American standpoint of like, America's consistently losing its 8 forms of power and China's coming straight up. There was a time which I asked the concept of, are there any empires that have bounced back and not just fallen? And there was a blip, if you go back to the China Empire, way back, like 400 and something years ago, 450 years ago, there was a blip where it was coming down and then it kind of bounced like a check mark for a period of time before the Dutch took over. I'm like, okay, so there's a chance for kind of a bounce for America instead of just a fall. And then I started researching China and what's going on over there, because that was the big buzz of like, oh, they're going to take over in the Silk Road, and they're over lending the countries that can't afford it, so that when they can't pay their debt, they're going to literally take over critical infrastructure. I know that happened already in Tanzania. I've seen it happening in Fiji. I know it's a strategy, let's say, of expansion. But there was another book that was fascinating to read, which was called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. Have you all read that book yet?
I have not. No.
Ooh. This one's really good.
Yeah.
And so this person went and did research where they look at what key factors, if staying on the path they're on now or disrupted, would basically shut down the entire world. And one of the key factors they talked about, as simple as it sounds, is population. And they looked at how many young people they are, how many babies they're having, what the general age of the whole population is, and which countries are most at risk for a population just cliff that they fall right off of. And what was fascinating is China is one of the highest on the list. Italy, China, Greece. There are certain countries where they're not creating enough new population to sustain what they have. Therefore, there won't be enough humans to sustain the industry they've built. Therefore, the industry collapses. And I was like, whoa. Well, now you compare the two and say, well, which is it? One says there's a hockey stick of power growing tremendously in China, and the other one says China's about to fall off a cliff due to the fact that they're not having enough people being created. And it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Then it goes backwards and it says, well, what happens if industry breaks down? Well, it takes shipping. And it says if just shipping were to break, how many countries or cities cease to exist? So what are the net importers versus net exporters of food? And I was like, well, you could start taking little X's across the map and being like, well, those cities are gone.
Yep.
Because if shipping stops, they don't have enough supply to keep going for more than a few weeks or possibly months. It's like they're just gone. That's wild. Like the whole cities disappear because there's no infrastructure to actually get the stuff to them for them to live off of. Then you go down to, well, how would that affect? We had that experience in the US where a certain chip couldn't make it. So all the auto manufacturers were having trouble releasing their cars to the market. It's like, that was one chip. Holy smokes. What happens if there's a total disconnection between places where stuff's made versus places where we want it? And it proposed, it said, well, don't worry. What generally will happen is whoever has the ability to move infrastructure of plants and buildings and all that stuff, all they'll do is move closer to where the major capital is and wrap themselves around it so that somewhere like the US will be fine. We'll just have very centralized things built around us that are continuing to keep it going. But they said a farmer in Bangladesh or a farmer in India or a farmer in Thailand, no one's going to build a giant plant to produce the level of tractors and equipment they need to keep those farms going, which means they're not going to keep going, which means, oh my God, now there's a giant famine.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it went on and on about stuff like this, which I was then taking Ray's work, side-by-siding it with this work and be like, ooh, I need to find the cross-section of truth and find out how does this actually add up. So far, no one actually knows, but people are kind of taking bets based on where they put their money, where they're putting their time and attention, how they're choosing to show up, where they're buying land, where they're building houses. It's interesting.
Let me add a third pillar to that, Jairek, because I love the historical significance of cyclical repetition. I think it's very cool. But here's something that wasn't happening 500 years ago. We didn't have air travel. We didn't have the communication structure that we have now in regards to internet, phones, so on and so forth, that we had 500 years ago. So I would think that could also throw a big bumper in the mix, and we don't know exactly which way it's going to go just because we don't have that historically. We don't have that whatsoever because the word gets out so quick. Clearly the dollar is going to fall. It's being propped up illegally, actually, but it's being propped up, and that's very significant. So when that toasts, what happens? Are we going to go to gold and silver? So we are in, I think, the most incredible time now that ever, and it doesn't mean it's going to be wonderful. It could be hell before it gets better, and I think that's probably likely, but based on what we're seeing. So adding that into the mix, what's your thought process?
Hey, if Alaska can keep the doors on and United keeps their wheels tight, there's a possibility that air travel keeps us moving quickly around the world. But we're also seeing even things falling apart there. I think United had a bad streak for a couple weeks where there was like 12 or 14 incidents in 2 weeks.
Right.
Wheels falling off in San Francisco, landing gear collapsing. I was like, oh boy, I'm not sure. Nothing against United, but I was like, that's kind of a rough couple weeks there. It's a consistent theme in one group. And then Alaska entered the scene with a door flying off. I was like, well, that's a whole different experience. My son now sits in the middle seat when we fly, just in case.
I'm the knucklehead that goes emergency row every time, so I'll be the first out
just take
in a
a
bad
parachute.
way.
It'll be good. You'll get the free skydiving experience that came with the flight.
I've already been there.
Too funny.
But it's that thought process of those are critical infrastructure pieces.
Right.
I'm watching with all the migration stuff happening of people into the U.S. I'm getting little messages of friends who live in different cities, and I was like, this is stressing critical infrastructure in certain places. Like it's literally messing with the infrastructure. One thing Ray talked about that I found fascinating is generally in major cities or major places, when the infrastructure is challenged. Well, two things. One, at some point, to get out of a deficit, a big answer is raising taxes. That's just a solution that people use to try to get out of a deficit, or cut the spending. So raise the intake, cut the outtake is kind of a simple solution. And so if they're willing to cut the spending, which they haven't yet, they keep jacking it up. And then two, if they're willing at some point to have to raise the taxes to bring in more from people, interesting enough, if they do that, generally what happens is the places that they do that first, people with assets and income, like real big income, go, I'm not dealing with that. That's crazy.
They move.
Right.
Yeah.
And they move. And so out of San Francisco, New York, like you're seeing migrations of people moving, being like, I'm not dealing with that. And then what's happened though is now the people who are left, they just lost a ton more money. Now they're being taxed more and the infrastructure is breaking. So I'm like, that's really a mess because now they get less services for more taxes. Oof, that's ugly. And so generally speaking, we're already seeing that in motion, which was talked about in a few chapters of the two different books. I was like, ooh, that's fascinating. And then I'm hearing the buzz of people relocating, grabbing homes or land in second countries, picking up second passports. And so generally this buzz is happening. And one of the big questions I look at is, how do you navigate that? How do you navigate that? It's really easy to get caught and hooked into it and stuck where you're like, and just freak out. But how do you actually navigate it? So I look in my life at who do I know that's really good at navigating insanely chaotic situations. And so I lean back on people I've had the honor of training them and them training me. I spent a couple days at Hurlburt Air Force Base in Florida with the special ops guys who are pararescue jumpers. And I enjoy them as human beings because I love their creed. Their little creed on their coin is first there that others may live. And so I think of them as the paramedics of the special ops. When someone gets hurt who's on a special operations mission, Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, any of these guys, this is the group that flies in, fights their way to find the hurt person, saves their life. There's someone in each one of these groups that could take their backpack off. They have something called the golden hour where they then pick them up, wrap around, fight back out, and then get them to a full surgery tent within 60 minutes to save their life is the goal. And so these are frontline paramedics, I look at it as, or rescue people. Unbelievable humans who are willing to risk their life to save another human's life under those conditions. I look at them and I was like, it's hard enough for a doctor doing normal surgery in a hospital to stay calm and focused. how in the world do these humans stay calm and focused with bullets whizzing by their head while they're trying to do the same type of surgery?
Wow.
Yeah. Incredible.
That's nuts. So I found them, we found each other. They put me through a day and a half of their training where they tied me up and threw me in the pool and did something called drown proofing. And do stuff like that. And then I did some training with them for a whole afternoon. We had fun. But with that, there's something they use. It's really simple. It's just called tactical breathing. Tactical breathing is 3160. It's 3 seconds in, pause for 1, breathe out slowly for 6. And all it does is regulates your nervous system and allows you to stay calm. And so I grew up in an environment where my dad and family is generally very high energy, like up, going, excited, passionate, that kind of energy. I had a client who used to train the snipers for the Navy SEALs, calmest person I ever met in my life. Having a chance to go train with all the gentlemen in the special ops on the pararescue jumpers, calmest people I've ever met in my life. And I was like, okay, something's weird. Every single one of these people who are considered elite in what they do are calmer than anyone else I know. Mm-hmm. And I started realizing it was not the ability for them to upregulate into this totally intense, crazy version of themselves that can handle anything. It was their ability to downregulate in times of chaos and stay calm, present, and grounded when all hell's breaking loose around them. And so I look at that and I was like, that's one tool we could probably use just as a group if we're trying to navigate something that feels chaotic. It'd be probably pretty smart, 3, 4, 5 times a day to practice 5 minutes of tactical breathing. There's that 31-60 ratio. If you get that into your nervous system, the goal is use it when you don't need it so that in the times that feel chaotic, that's where your body drops back to. I heard a friend on a podcast say, under stress and chaos, you drop down to the level of your training. And so if you're regularly and consistently training 31-60 in your nervous system, when you get into a position where all of a sudden it's chaos for you, the natural base you'd fall back to is calm and focused, which is what you need in moments like that.
Right. Very powerful tool. I'm intrigued by the calm. Lewis and I are kind of a little bit like that. We look at the news all day and we're looking at what's going on, and people come to us and they say, you guys don't get all hair on fire about it all. You just kind of go through it and we look at it pragmatically, and we can kind of get to the point actually where we can laugh about it if we want to, and it calms the audience down. The people who watch this show, are calm because they see us being calm. They don't see us being all wow and crazy about, the stuff that goes on and as it happens out there. Yeah. Wow.
I heard another statement that someone said, and I'm still processing this, but I'll share what the statement was, and then maybe there's a little discussion around it. Someone said, every young man's goal should be to become the strongest man at his father's funeral.
Yep.
Powerful.
And there was the thought around it is, when someone you care about, the family's kind of shaken up.
Yep.
And people are worried, people are shaken, people are missing him, people are sad or angry or frustrated or whatever. And it said it should be every son's aspiration to become the strongest, most grounded human in that moment, where everyone can then lean in and go, we still have that grounding effect here present. It's just changed forms from the father to the son in that moment.
I know exactly what you mean. When my dad passed away in 98, that was the gift he left me. He left me with the gift of knowing that I could lead. And I really had to, because the whole family was exactly as you said, all broken up, and it was really hard on everyone. And it was like, okay, there's no one leading. I stepped into that role. And it was powerful lesson for me, because it really translated into what I'm doing today. There's no question. I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for that experience. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And calm in the face of crisis it's just completely underrated. It is it is imperative. I mean, I don't like to use myself as an example, but not just a couple of years ago, my wife broke her ankle in half where it was literally pointing in the wrong direction. And within Well, you've heard the story, Robert. Within about 30 seconds, I said, okay, honey, take a deep breath. I want you to look forward. And I just set her ankle exactly where it needed to be. And eventually, when we got her into surgery, they go, wow, this is set perfectly. But it was all based on what you're saying, just very calm. This is a decision that needs to be made now. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've been in several emergency situations, and it's amazing when you can just breathe through it and be that calming factor. You can be so much more effective.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's important that you're having this discussion today, Jairek, because our audience are a lot of doers. So they're in what we call the patriot movement, and they want to make a difference, and they go in front of city councils and board meetings, and they sometimes protest, and they really try to make a difference. And I'm glad you're having this discussion, because for them, being the pillar is absolutely imperative if you're going to draw people in and help lead them. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I'll give you another thought to consider. I took a class in college on debate, and the professor shared something that was frustrating at first, but then useful over time, which was, if you can't wholeheartedly argue both sides, you don't understand the concept well enough.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Very true.
And then they laid out a whole bunch of topics. It was very easy to pick a side. That's right. That's wrong. That's good. That's bad. I could easily pick sides on all the topics.
Right.
And they said, whatever you picked, here's your task. Argue the opposite and win.
Yeah.
There's no way. That is wrong. I'm not. I'm going to argue for what's wrong. Are you joking? What's wrong with you?
Right.
No, it's wrong. Like, I don't know what you're judging me on, but my ability to tell you that's wrong is very simple. It's wrong. And they're like, no, that's not the point. I need you to go do your homework, to learn all the facts and details, to be able to stand up and hold a full debate and win from the opposite perspective.
Wow.
If you can't do that, you do not understand the concept well enough. I was like, I sure as hell know the concept. I'm right. They're wrong. That is it. And they're like, no, that's not the point. I need you to go learn the concept well enough to argue both sides fully and then make a choice of what's right for you.
Yeah.
Because I already made that choice. And they're like, no. And so I'll take this a little bit back. For most of us, we're born, and within 5 minutes of being born, someone tells us what tribe we belong to, what religion we belong to, what we're going to believe, how we're going to behave, what class we belong to, and how our life's generally going to go. 5 minutes. Now I always ask grown adults, at what point of your life, was it 15, 12, 17, 21, 50, at what point did you take out a piece of paper, write down everything that was assigned to you at 5 minutes old, and consciously look at all the alternatives, and then make a choice once you're able to then argue all alternatives on which one is truly right for you? And 99.9% of humans have never done that work.
Right. Very true.
And I said, therefore, you're living in default. You're living off of a reflection of something that was handed to you at 5 minutes old, not a choice you've made by truthfully looking at all options available and deciding this is the one for you. This might not be the right fit for this audience, but it was an eye-opening experience for me. So I went to a university in San Diego that's considered a Catholic university. I'm not Catholic, but I went to a Catholic university. And one of the required classes was world religions. It was required to graduate from the school. It was taught by a Buddhist monk at a Catholic school.
That's awesome.
And I was like, you're messing with my head, people. Like, ooh, what's going on? Like, there's a Buddhist monk at a Catholic school teaching about all the other world religions. Like, help me understand what's going on. One of the requirements to graduate the class was we had to go sit in 5 different religious ceremonies from 5 different religions. And we had to feel and understand and experience how we behaved and reacted according to what we were experiencing. Some of them I sat in, I was like, this is really cool. Like, y'all do cool stuff in this one. Like, this is neat. Others I sat in and I'm like, people really think this is true? Like, I can't, how could you possibly think that's true? Like, but I got to experience my own thoughts, feelings, and reflections on observation, but being there and actually being in it and experiencing it, not just outside judgment and opinions. The most eye-opening part of it was as I learned more about all the different tenets and frameworks and beliefs, there was this piece where I was like, oh, I don't even agree with it. But now I completely understand why that person's saying what they're saying. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. The logic adds up. If I were to think that and have been taught that and now believe this, the logic actually makes sense of why they would think what they're thinking or say what they're saying. And it comes back to that layer before we talked about, which was if I wasn't able to argue both sides completely and win, I don't know it well enough. And so as soon as I started to understand all the components, I was like, oh, that makes sense. I think a great gift society needs more of right now is, generally speaking, we're very polarized and it's being pulled further and further and further in opposite directions.
Right.
I had someone tell me one time, I was on a podcast, and this lady was saying, you know, men need to learn how to be more emotional and how to share their feelings and how to speak, you know, from the heart and share, you know, talk to these things. I was like, some of them need to get socked in the face and learn how to toughen up. And I said that highly is dependent on where you are in the world.
Right.
If you're in San Diego, they might get a little toughened up. If you happen to be in you know, the Wild West in Montana on a dude ranch, they might need to learn to talk about emotions a little bit more. I don't know. They're like, it's different in different places. But to make a broad generalization that all men need this or all women need this or anything like that, that's not hopeful. I think it's, you know, I have friends who do this in the food industry where even, I'll mention one of them, there was a guy who came out that said everyone needs to put, you know, more fat. Our brain needs more fat. So you should be putting butter in your coffee to have more fat. And I'm like, who is this good for? And he's like, everybody.
No.
And if you go pull apart how the human body works, for a good amount of people, it's useful. And so the ability to specialize, I believe, is something also we didn't have 500 years ago. And so something that's come online is we're getting closer to a saliva test or a gut bacteria test you could take that tells you what food is actually right for your body. We're getting closer to, you know, an AI thing that can read your heart monitor and blood pressure and tell you when you need the right type of medication or support. We're getting closer to this very personalized system that allows us to care for the individual how they need to be cared for, not in general, broad terms, but very specific and accurate for who they are and what their actual functioning like in this moment. I think that's fascinating and changes a lot of things for what's going to be available to us.
And so too, Jairek, if you think about our school system, right? We have one teacher who'll teach one lesson one way, 35 students in the class. It's like it's generalized. And like, does every student get served the same way? That would be fantastic if we could.
Did you see it?
No, I haven't seen it.
It already happened. There's a school that's placed AI on notepads or little iPads or whatever they are at each desk. And the teacher no longer teaches. The teacher facilitates and answers questions. And every student learns at their own pace.
Oh, wow.
In their own learning style. And the AI keeps adapting until the child completely picks it up and masters it. And so every child is uniquely getting the exact education they require to master, grasp, and understand the concept.
See, that's the good use of AI.
Facilitating the space.
Yeah, well, that's that. You know, everyone's afraid of AI, but AI is a double-edged sword, right? So it can be used for good, it can be used for evil, and this is a great use of it.
Hopefully. Either that or someone's going to program it wrong, and we're all going to end up doing stupid stuff to each other.
Yeah, there's always that, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Yeah.
But like you said, double edged. I hope it goes right. It seems like it's moving. I hope it's in the right direction. History only tells us that, though. We have to look back from a long point in the future and be like, either that was a great idea or someone really screwed up. No one knows till we're on the other side.
Yeah, well, like you said, I mean, if you put in good content and put in fair and balanced content, it's useful, but you could sway the programming, and it really is dependent on who's putting the content in and what content they're feeding it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And as humans, I remember I had a friend from India who's a monk who's taught all kinds of great stuff. I learned a lot from him just in meditation, stillness, and mindfulness and all this stuff. He came over and was invited to a friend's house in San Diego, and this friend was an internet marketer, so everyone drove a Lambo and a Ferrari and a Porsche, and like
I know that
outside his
industry
condo was this whole lineup of cars. Everyone was like wearing their, I don't even know what the shirt's called, but like that shirt with the collar and the sleeves, it's expensive, and they're all these fancy people. And this little guy gets up, and his name is Nandagiri, and he started talking and gave his speech, and at the end, someone raised their hand, and he's like, hey, whenever I talk to my family, they always say you're so lucky. Like you got so lucky to achieve so much in your life. And it drives me nuts. It's like, I'm not lucky. Like I wake up every day. I do the work. Like I build my mindset. I build my body. I show up. I do the work when it's hard. I do all the things. Like, how do I convince them to start doing the things in their life? And I remember being like, yeah, that is cool. Great question. And my little friend was sitting there thinking, he's like, And then all of a sudden a thought hit me, and I was like, can I try? And he's like, oh, my friend Jairek has a thought. What is it? And I said, let me throw something out there that's going to sound crazy, especially coming out of my mouth. What if we get to the end and find out we were the ones that were wrong? And I'll tell you, there was a whole room full of people that didn't want to accept concept.
Yep.
And I said, but truthfully, just wrap your head around it. If you can't argue both sides and you don't know it well enough, so just step out in the unknown and take the concept of, what if we got to the end and it turns out like we were in the crazy. I was like, what do we do then? And it comes back to this uncertainty. And we said, okay, well, wait a second. Can we come up with the right qualifiers that would allow us to know, even if we were right or wrong, we actually did help beyond being right or wrong. We actually did something of value to humanity. We actually did something useful. Even if we were completely wrong, we still did something useful. And I was like, we have to come up with a new set of qualifiers instead of right and wrong. That what would something be that's actually useful, that even if you completely disagreed with the other side, you could still do what's useful every day. And both sides would agree that it's useful regardless of agreeing or not agreeing with each other. And I said, the moment we changed the target, we recalibrated. Because now I can stand shoulder to shoulder with someone and say, you're dead wrong. I do not agree with you. But hey, let's just do the thing that's useful. And they can look at me and say, you're dead wrong, and I don't agree with you. But let's do the thing that's useful.
Great way of looking at it.
The moment we change that piece. And I said, has this ever happened in human history? And I went backwards. The Civil War. This one's fascinating. And I was in a sales job going office to office, and I met some great people up in the Northeast. I was in Boston at the time. And I met this little old man. He was so sweet. And he says, you seem like a good guy. I would like to introduce you to something to see if there's any interest. I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, what is it? In San Diego, I'd be worried. In Central South America, they're about to take me on some like life journey quest thing with ayahuasca. But like Boston, I don't know what these guys are up to. So I'm like, okay, what is this thing you speak of? And he said, meet me at this address in, downtown in the city, and I'll take you on a tour and show you some things. So I'm like, okay. So I met this old guy, and I'm like, if anything goes wrong, at least I got to fight him. He doesn't look, bigger than him, but that concept. So we got there, and he took me on a tour of the Mason Temple. I was like, interesting. And we walked around, And he showed me all the rites and rituals and the history of how America came to be. He showed me the book where the original Tea Party people signed X's instead of their name on that night and then went and did the Tea Party. He showed me the picture of the French gentleman who lent America the money and army to win the Revolutionary War. Like, this is some cool history. Like, I don't know about the whole situation here, but I do like the history part. This is pretty neat to just see all the things of how it actually happened in the original form of America. One of the things he mentioned is he says this was really interesting. During the Civil War, there were people who belonged to this group on both sides, both red and blue at the time, fighting. And what was interesting that I found fascinating was they would fight all day. So loading their muskets, firing stuff at each other all day. So they completely disagreed. But there was something else that was able to bring them together in conversation, in the ability to talk, communicate, and collaborate. I said, that's fascinating. They didn't agree, but they somehow still were able to find something to connect on. And they have terms they use. I won't share what he shared with me. That's their stuff to keep. But this concept of, what if we could change the target instead of who's right to what's useful? And could we find an agreement on what's useful? And could we say, hey, even though I radically disagree with you, I totally wholeheartedly disagree with you, I can still do what's useful. Where we see that happen is usually the best parts of humanity. I have a good friend whose house was just ripped apart by this tornado that went through. And it was heartbreaking hearing her. Her lips were trembling, her eyes were teary. She was just sharing her experience of, luckily her kids and husband weren't at home, but she was. That tornado went straight over her house. She was in a bathtub, crying and screaming, please God, make it stop, as her ears popped and she couldn't hear or see anything, and everything was being ripped and thrown apart all over the place.
Wow.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I felt for her. I mean, she's someone I dated a long time ago and a friend from a while back, but immediately I was like, oh my God, I never want someone to experience that. That's horrible. What happened next is beautiful. She's been posting all the people of her town and community who've come together to help clean it up, put it back together, bring supplies, shelter them, care for them, feed them, all those pieces. The humanity aspect. And the way I sum that up is all those people are choosing to be useful. None of them have asked what's her stance on certain things and if they agree with her or not before they showed up to help. All of them said, that's a human in need. What's useful right now? Here, let me bring over some food. Why don't you come stay at my house? How can I help? They all focused on being useful. And so part of that discussion might be, what's useful? What's useful?
Well, we saw, Jairek, if we go back to 9/11, we saw that happen here in America after 9/11. Everybody came together, and we were all on the same side. We were all on the same boat. But sadly, it didn't continue. The divisiveness started to creep back in, and where we are today, we're terribly divided. But now we're asking, if I don't agree with you politically, I can't be your friend. I'm like, what? When in history was this ever possible, right? We've got to get away from that.
That part's cyclical. Yeah. My wife and I were in South Africa for a few months last year, and she kept saying something to me. She said, people are so polite here. Like, people are really polite here for some reason. She goes, is it like the culture? Is it just war, the more polite they become? And she goes, what does that mean? And I said, you'll see, watch. We were at a cafe and this young woman was there, and we asked, like, where are you from? South Africa is generally, at least in Cape Town, it's a melting pot. So you have people from Zimbabwe and Tanzania and Uganda and all over who've migrated down to this city for work or opportunity or lifestyle, whatever they want. And this young woman was from Zimbabwe. She had migrated out of necessity because there was no jobs and they were running out of food. So she moved down there and she was working at a cafe. And she shared with us, she goes, there's something here called Zimphobia, where there's a statement in South Africa, specifically in this, this region, where people are saying, all these people from Zimbabwe are coming here and stealing our jobs. They need to leave. They need to get kicked out of our country. We need to get our country back. And there was an announcement that said at that time, by June 30th, I think, or June 1st, whatever it was, everyone who was there from Zimbabwe that wasn't legally processed the right way to be there must leave immediately. And then there was a consequence. The consequence was, we asked her, what happens if you don't leave? You just stay. And you're like, meh, I'll work on the paperwork. I'll get it when I get it. And this young woman looked at us, and her eyes, 18 years old, her parents, her friends, her uncles, her aunts, her family, everyone was butchered in front of her. And she literally hid in the tall grass for like 4 days just to stay alive, eating grass until they'd move on, and she could walk 5 miles to get to a UN Red Cross camp where they could save her life and keep her alive. And I said, her out of anybody would totally be justified to be resentful, hateful, angry with these people who took her entire village from her family, her friends, her loved ones. And she decided to team up with a friend of ours who teaches this healing technique through tapping and releasing energy,
NFT,
releasing pain from the body.
Yep.
Hmm?
NFT,
And
right?
now she goes around the world and teaches young people who've been through trauma how to heal.
Fabulous.
I was like, I would have totally understood if she wanted to like hurt people after what happened to her. Like that'd be pretty normal. But she chose to be useful and to go help people heal instead. And so I propose to your audience, how can you be useful?
It's a very good question, Jairek. Very good question. And I think it does end up, that comment alone or that thought alone will end up bridging a lot of the gap that we're seeing here in this country right now. You know?
Yeah.
Lewis, did you have a question for Jairek? I know you're...
No, I agree wholeheartedly. It's time, and you know, Robert, I'm working on the Unity project, so it's time for sides to come together and find a way how we can. It's really simple, really. You find where your like mind is, and you work in that direction and take care of business, and you can hash out your differences later. But it's very important. I think, yeah, finding what you're useful. I don't think it could be said better than that. It just makes so much sense.
No. Jairek, you've nailed it today. Thank you so much for being part of our program. I just want to let people know, too, that they can go find Jairek on JarekRobbins.com. Let's see here. I have the screen up here. Just a minute. Here it is. This is his website, JarekRobbins.com. And you can find out more about what he's doing. He's got some freebies up there, too, for you. Always some good stuff, right?
It took me a long time to convince my team to allow me to write the word howdy on the front of my website.
Howdy. I love it. It's so inviting and so friendly.
They still don't think it's a good idea, but it's part of my personality, so I'm going to leave it.
I love it. I love it,
I love
actually.
it. Yeah, I was on your website last night. I'm going to give you kudos here. This is a very, very well designed website, very well put together, very easy to navigate. Hard to find really good websites out there. So if you're looking for a good website, just go visit it just for that reason alone. But there's so much there. And Jairek, you're available for private coaching as well, or is it just courses at this point?
Some coaching. I do a little bit. I wound down my personal client list to go do the project at Success for 1.5 years. And so I'm actually in the last couple of weeks just refilling those spots back up. So there's a few spots that I'm doing personal with, and then everyone else I'm recommending if we have a course that could support them, we'll put them there. And if not, we've trained 200 and something plus coaches. So we have a giant network of coaches who specialize in all different types of coaching. And so a lot of what we do when people reach out is just place them with the right coach.
Awesome. Thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate you. And Lewis, any last words before we wrap up this interview?
No, this is beautiful. Thank you, Jairek, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So appreciate you. Thank you so much. All right. Just one more thing before we wrap up for today. Thank you to Jairek Robbins again. What a great interview. I really appreciated that. If you're a pet lover, like I'm a pet lover, my buddy Thumper here, he's doing super, super, super well. We thought for sure that he was at the end of life a couple of months back, and then Lewis suggested, hey, why don't we try him on the food from Pet Club 24/7? And I said, all right, nothing to lose, right? I started giving him the food. It mixed it in with his existing food. You don't want to change the food too quickly on animals. Have been eating the same thing for a while. So I started to mix it in, started to add it to his existing food. He started to really love it. And within a week, I saw noticeable, couldn't find them anymore. I thought, well, that's a miracle. That's incredible. But not only that, his attitude was different. He had a lot more energy. And this has been going on now for months. He's acting like his old self again. He hasn't been that way for years. So I spoke with Kristen Ludlow over at Pet Club 24/7, and she explained to me that she has a stack, thousands of similar stories from all kinds of cats, all kinds of dogs, even horses now. And they also have supplementation for humans. So I want you to take a look at this. They have a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you try it and your pet doesn't like it or you don't see a noticeable difference, you can contact them and they'll give you your money back. I know you won't do that because you're going to see a difference. Literally took a week, and the difference was absolutely noticeable, unmistakable, how quickly my cat turned around. And he's been doing really well ever since. Try it for yourself. Try it for your animal. Your animal deserves it because you love them. You want to keep them around as long as you can, and giving them the proper nutrition and a healing mushroom, key ingredient, makes all the difference. You'll find the link in the description of the video below. Please have a look at it. And like I said, give it a 30-day trial. I think you're really going to like it. All right. Thank you so much for watching. We love you all. Thank you for your support. Thank you for following. Thank you for sharing. If you like this interview, please share it with your friends and followers. That helps us, and that helps the people who you share it with be a little bit more informed. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again real soon.